Of all countries in Asia, here in Japan, you have the freedom to use the materials you have gathered from the West according to your genius and your need. Therefore, your responsibility is all greater, for in your voice, Asia shall answer the question that Europe has submitted to the conference of man. In your land, experiments will be carried by which the East will change the aspects of modern civilization, infusing life wherein it is a machine, substituting the human hearts for cold expediency, not caring so much for power and success of harmonious and living growth, for truth and beauty. I cannot but bring to your mind those days when the whole Eastern Asia of Burma to Japan was united with India in the closest tie of friendship, the only natural tie which can exist between nations. There was a living communication of hearts, a nervous system involved through which messages ran between about the deepest of needs in humanity. We did not stand in fear of each other. We had not to arm ourselves to keep each other in check. Our relations was not that self-interest of exploration and spoliation of each other's pocket. Ideas and ideals were exchanged gifts of the highest.
Love were offered and taken. No differences of language and customs hindered is in approaching each other heart to heart. No pride of race or insolent consciousness of superiority, physical or mental, married or relation, or artists and literatures put forth new leaves and flowers under the influence of this sunlight of united hearts, and races belonging to the different lands and languages and histories acknowledged the highest unity of man and the deepest bond of the love. May we not always remember that is those days of peace and goodwill, of men uniting for those supreme ends of life or nature led by for itself than blame of immorality, which has helped our people to be born again in a new age, to be able to survive its own outworn structures and take on a new young body, to come out unscattered from the shock of a most wonderful revolution that the world has ever seen. The political civilization which has sprung up from the soil to Europe and it's overrunning the whole world like some prolific weed is based upon exclusiveness. It is always watchful to keep the aliens at bay or the exterminate them. It is carnivorous and carniblastic in tendency. It feeds upon the resource of the other peoples
and tries to swallow their whole future. It is always afraid of other races achieving eminence, naming it as a peril, and tries to thwart all symptoms of greatness outside its own boundaries, forcing down races of men who are weaker to be eternally fixed in their weakness. Before this political civilization came to its power and opened its hungry jaws wide enough to gulp down great continents of the earth, we had wars, pillages, changes of monarchy, and consequent miseries, but never such a sight of fearful and hopeless voracity, such a wholesale feeding of nation upon nation, such huge machines for turning great portions of the earth into mincemeat. Never such terrible jealousies, with all their ugly teeth and claws ready for tearing open each other's vitals. This political civilization is scientific, not human. It is powerful because it concentrates all its forces upon one purpose, like a millionaire acquiring money at the cost of his soul. It betrays its trust, it waves its measures of lies without shame. It enshrines gigantic ideals of greed in its temples, taking great pride in the costly ceremonials of its worship, calling this patriotism. And it can be safely prophesied that this cannot go on, for there is a moral law in this world.
which has its application both to individuals and to organized bodies of men. You cannot go on violating these laws in the name of a nation, yet enjoy their advantage as individuals. This public sapping of ethical ideals slowly reacts upon each member of society, gradually breeding weakness where it is not seen and causing that cynical distrust of all things sacred in human nature, which is the true symptoms of senility. You must keep in mind that this political civilization, this creed of national patriotism, has not been given a long trail. The lamp of ancient Greece, where it is extinct in the land of where it was first lighted, the power of Rome lies dead and buried under the ruins of its vast empire. But the civilization whose basis is society and the spiritual idol of men is still living thing in China and in India. Though it may look feeble and small, judged by the standards of mechanical power of modern days, yet like small seed, it still contain life and will sprout and grow, and spreads its beneficent branches, producing flowers and fruits. When its times come and shower of grace descend upon it from heaven, but the ruins of skyscraper of power and broken machinery of greed, even God's reign is powerless to raise.
up again, for they are not of life, but went again life as a whole. They are relics of the rebellion that shattered itself to pieces against the eternal. But the charge is brought again that the ideals which reach in the east are static, that they have not the impetus in them to move to open a new task of knowledge and power, that the system of philosophy which are the mainstays of the time-worn civilization of the east despise all outward proof, remaining stolidly satisfied in their subjective certainty. This proves that when our knowledge is vague, we are apt to accuse of vagueness our object or knowledge itself. To a Western observer, our civilization appears as all metaphysics. A deaf man piano playing appear to be mere movements of fingers and new music. He cannot think that we have found some deep basics of reality upon which we have built our institution. Unfortunately, all proof of reality are in the realization. The reality of the scene before you depends only upon the fact that you can see, and it is difficult for us to prove to an unbeliever that our civilization is not a nebulous system of abstract speculation, that it has achieved something which is a positive truth that can
give man's heart its shelter and sustenance. It has evolved an inner sense, a sense of vision, the vision of the infit reality in all fit things. But he says, you do not make any progress. There is no movement in you. I ask him, how do you know it? You have to judge progress according to its aim. A railway train makes its progress towards the terminus station. It is movement. But a full grown tree has no defined movement of that kind. Its progress is the inward progress of life. It lives with its aspiration towards light, tinkling in its leaves and creeping its silent sap. We also have lived for we still live, and we have our aspiration for a reality that as beyond it, giving it a meaning that reals above all evils of life, bringing its peace and purity. It's a cheerful renunciation of self. The product of this inner life is a living product. It will be needed when the earth returns home, wearily and dust laden. When the soldier is wounded, when the weight is squandered away, all pride is humbled. When man's heart cries for a truth in the immensity of facts and harmony in the contraction of tendon cries, its value is not in its
multiplication of materials but in its spiritual fulfillment. There are things that cannot wait. You have to rush and run and march. If you must fight or take the best place in the market, you strain your nerves and are on the alert. When you chase opportunities that are always on the wing, but there are ideals which do not play hide and seek with your life. They slowly grow from seed to flower, from flower to fruit. They require infinity, space and heaven's light to mature. And the fruit that they produce can survive year of insult and neglect. The east with her ideals which whose bosom are stored the aids of sunlight. The silence of star can patiently wait till the west, hurrying after the expedient loses breath and stops. Europe, while busily speeding to her engagement, disdainfully casts her glance from her carriage window at the reaper reaping his harvest in the field, and in her intoxication of speed cannot but think him as slow and ever receding backward. But the speed comes to its end, the engagement loses its meaning, and the hungry heart clamors for food, till at the last she comes to the slowly reaper reaping his harvest in the sun. For if the office cannot wait, or the buying and selling, or the craving for excitement, love waits. And the beauty and the wisdom of suffering and the fruit, patient devotion, even meekness of simple faith. And thou shalt wait the east till her time comes. I must not hesitate to acknowledge where Europe is great, for great she is without doubt. We cannot help loving her with all our heart and paying her the best homage of our admiration. The Europe who in her literature and art pours out an inexhaustible custard of beauty and truth,
fertilizing all countries and all times. The Europe who with a mind which is titanic in unitarian power is sweeping the height and the deep of the universe, winning her homage of knowledge from the infinitely great and the infinitely small, applying all the resource of her great intellect and heart in her healing and the sick of alleviating those miseries of man which up till now we were contented to accept in a spirit of now. We were hope, hopeless resignation. The Europe who is making coaxing and compelling the great force of natural into man's service. Such true greatness must have its motive power in spiritual strength. For only the spirit of man can defy all limitation, have faith in its unlimited ultimate success through its such light beyond the immediate and the
Apparent gladly suffer martyrdom for ends which cannot be achieved in its lifetime, and accept failure without acknowledging defeat. In the heart of Europe runs the purest stream of human love, of justice, of spirit, of self-certificated for higher ideas. The Christian culture of centuries has sunk deep in her life's grove. In Europe, we have seen noble minds who have ever stood up for the rights of man, irrespective of color and creed, who have braved calumny and insult from their own people in fighting or for human things, cast and raising their voice against the mad orgies of militation, against the rage for brutal relations or rapacity that sometimes takes possessions of old people who are always ready to make rapacity for once done in the stem the tide of quality injustice and that falls uncurled because the recession is weak and innocuous on the part of the injury. There are these knight errants of modern Europe who have not lost their faith in the disaster love of freedom in the ideas which own no geographical boundaries or national seekers. They are these are there to par that the following that fountain head of the water of everlasting life has not run dry in Europe, and from this she will have her rebirth time after.
Only there where Europe is too consciously busy in building up her power, defying her deeper nature and mocking it, heaping up her iniquities to the sky, crying for God's vengeance and spreading the infection of ugliness, physical and moral, over the face of the earth with her heartless commerce, heedlessly outraging man's sins of the beautiful and the good. Europe is supremely good in her beneficence, where her face is turned to all humanity, and Europe is supremely evil in
her maleficent aspect, where her face is turned only upon her own interest, using all her power of greatness for ends which are against the infinite and the eternal in man. Eastern Asia has been pursuing its own path, evolving its own civilization, which was not political but social, not predatory and mechanically efficient, but spiritual and based upon all the varied and deeper relation of humanity. The solution of the life problem of people were thought out in seclusion and carried out behind the security of aloofness, where all the dynastic changes and foreign invasion hardly touched them. But now we are overtaken by the outside world. Our seclusion is lost forever. Yet this we must not regret, as a plant should never regret when the obscurity of its seed time is broken. Now the time has come when we must make the world problem our own problem. We must bring the spirit of our civilization into harmony with her history of all nations of the earth. We must not in foolish pride still keep ourselves fast within the shell of the seed and the crust of the earth, which is protected and nourished and idols. For this, the shell and the crust were meant to be broken so that life may spring up in all its vigor and beauty, bring its offering to the world in open light. In this task of breaking the barrier and facing the world, Japan has come out the first in the East. She has infused hope in the heart of all Asia. This hope provides that hidden fire which is needed for all works of creation. Asia now feels that she must prove her life by producing living work. She must not lie passively dormant or feebly imitate the West in the infatuation of fear or flattery. For this we offer our thanks to this land of the rising sun, and solemnly ask her to remember that she has the mission of the East to fulfill. She must infuse the sap of a full humanity into the heart of modern civilization. She must never allow it to get choked with the nauseous time.
Undergrowth, but lead it up towards light and freedom, towards the pure air and broad space, where it can receive. In the dawn of its day and the darkness of its night, heaven's inspiration. Let the greatness of her idols become visible to all men like her snow-crowned Suzy rising from the heart of the country into the region of the infinite. Supremely distinct from its surroundings, beautiful like a maiden in its magnificent sweep of curve, yet slim and strong and certainly majestic. I have traveled in many countries and have met with men of all classes, but never in my travels did I feel the presence of the human so distinctly as in this land. In other great countries, signs of man's power loomed large, and I saw vast organizations which showed efficiency in all their features. Their display and extravagance in dress, in furniture, in costly entertainments are startling. They seem to push you back into a corner like a poor intruder at a feast. They are apt to make you envious or take your breath away with amazement. There, you do not feel man as supreme. You hurl it against a stupendous of things that alienates, but in Japan it is not the display of power or wealth that is the predominating element. You see everywhere emblems of love, admiration, and not mostly of ambition and greed. You see a people whose heart has come out and scattered itself in profusion in its commonest utensils of everyday life, in its social institutions, in its manners which are carefully perfect, and in its dealings
with things which are not only deft but graceful in every moment. What has impressed me most in this country is conviction that you have realized nature's secrets not by methods of analytical knowledge but by sympathy. You have known her language of lines and music of colors in the symmetry in her irregularities and the cadence in her freedom of movements. You have seen how she leads her immense crowds of things yet avoids all frictions, how the very conflicts in her creations break out in dance and music, how her extirpation has the aspect of fullness of self adornment and not a mere dissipation of display. You have discovered that nature reverses her power in forms of beauty, and it is this beauty which, like a mother, nourishes all the giant forces at.
her breast keeping them in active vigor yet in repose. You have known that energies of nature save themselves from wearing out by the rhythm of a perfect grace, and that she, with the tenderness of her curved lines, takes away fatigue from the world's muscles. I have felt that you have been able to assimilate these secrets into your life, and the truth which lies in the beauty of all things has passed into your souls. A merry knowledge of things can be had in a short enough time, but their spirit can only be acquired by centuries of training and self-control. Dominating nature from outside is a much simpler thing than making her your own in love's delight, which is a work of true genius. Your race has shown that genius, not by acquirement but by creation, not by display of things but by manifestation of its own inner being. This creative power there is in all nations, and it is ever active in getting hold of men's nature and giving them a form according to its ideals. But here in Japan, it seems to have achieved its success and deeply sunk into the minds of all men and permeated their muscles and nerves. Your instincts have become true. Your senses keen, and your hands have acquired nature skill. The genius of Europe has given here people the power of organization, which has specially made itself manifest in politics and commerce and in coordinating scientific knowledge. The genius of Japan has given you the vision of beauty in nature and the power of realizing it in your life. All particular civilization is interpretation of particular human experience. Europe seems to have felt empathically the conflict of things in the universe which can only be brought under control by conquest. Therefore, she is ever ready for fight, and the best portion of her attention is occupied in organizing forces. But Japan has felt in her world the touch of some presence which has evoked in her soul a feeling of reverent adoration
She does not boast of her mastery of nature, but to her she brings, with infinity care and joy, her offerings of love. Her relationship with the world is the deeper relationship of her. The spiritual bond of love she has established with the hills of her country, with the sea and the streams, with the forests in all their flowery moods and varied physiognomy of branches. She has taken into her heart all the rustling whisper and singing of the woodlands and sobbing of the waves. The sun and the moon she has studied in all the modulation of their lights and shades.
And she's glad to close her shops to greet the seasons in her orchards and gardens and cornfields. This opening of the heart to the soul of the world is not confined to a section of your privileged classes. It is not the forced product of exotic culture, but it belongs to all your men and women of all conditions. This experience of your soul in meeting a personality in the heart of the world has been embodied in your civilization. It is a civilization of human relationship. Your duty towards your state has naturally assumed the character of filial duty. Your nation becoming one family with your emperor as its head. Your national unity has not been evolved from the comradeship of arms for defensive and offensive purpose, or from partnership in raiding adventures dividing among each member the danger and spoils of robbery. It is not an outcome of the necessity of the organization for some ulterior purpose, but it is an extension of the family and the obligations of the heart in a wide field of space and time. The ideal of Maitri is at the bottom of your culture, Maitri with men and Maitri with nature. And the true expression of this love is in the language of beauty, which is so abundantly universal in this land. This is the reason why a stranger like myself, instead of feeling envy or humiliation before this manifestation of beauty, these creations of love feels a readiness to participate in the joy and glory of such revealment of the human heart. And this had made me all the more apprehensive of the change which threatens Japanese civilization as something like a menace to one's own person. For the huge heterogeneity of the modern age, whose only common bond is usefulness in nowhere, so pitifully exposed against the dignity and hidden power of reticent beauty as in Japan. But the danger lies in this, that organized ugliness storms the mind and carries the day by its mass, by its aggressive persistence, by its power of mockery directed against the deeper sentiments of heart. Its harsh obtrusiveness makes it forcibly visible to us, overcoming our senses, and we bring sacrifice to its altar, as does a savage to the fetish which appear powerful because of its hideousness. Therefore, its rivalry with things that are modest and profound and have the subtle delicacy of the life is to be dreaded. I am quite sure that there are men in your country who are not in sympathy with your inherited ideals, whose object is to gain and not to grow. They are loud in their boast that they have modernized Japan, while I agree with them so far as to say that the spirit of race should harmonize with the spirit of time. I must warn them that modernizing is a mere affection of modernism, just as affection of poesy and poetizing. It is nothing but mimicry. Only affection is louder than the original, and it's too literal. One must bear in mind that those who have the true modern spirit need not modernize, just as those who truly are brave are not bureaucrats. Modernism is not in the dress of the Europeans, or in the hideous structures where their children are interned to take their lessons, or in the square houses with flat straight wall surfaces creased with parallel lines of their lifetime. Certainly, modernism is not in the ladies' bonnets carrying on them the loads of incongruities. These are not modern but merely European. True modernism is the freedom of mind, not slavery of taste. It is independence through an action, not tutelage under European schoolmasters. It is science but not its wrong application in life. A mere imitation of our science teachers who reduce it into a superstition, absurdly invoking its aid for all impossible purposes. Life based upon mass science is attractive to some men because it has all the characteristics of sport. It feigns seriousness but not profound. When you go hunting, the less pity you have, the better. For your one object is to chase the game and kill it, to feel that you are the greater animal, that your method of destruction is true and scientific, and the life of science that is superficial life. It pursues success with skill and truthfulness, and takes no account of higher nature of man. But those whose minds are crude enough to plan their lives upon the supposition of the man is merely a hunter and his paradise. The paradise of sportsmen will be rudely awakened in the midst of their trophies of skeletons and skulls. I do not for a moment suggest that Japan should be unmindful of acquiring modern weapons of self-protection, but this should never be allowed to go beyond her instinct of self-preservation. She must know that the real power is not in the weapons themselves, but in the man who wields those weapons. And when he, in the eagerness for powers, multiples his weapons at the cost of his own soul, then it
is he who is in even greater danger than his enemies. Things that are living are so easily hurt. Therefore, they require protection. In nature, life protects itself within its coverings, which are built with life's own material. Therefore, they are in harmony with life's growth. Or else, when the time comes, they easily give way and are forgotten. The living man has his true production in his substitual idols, which have their vital connection with his life and grow with his growth. But unfortunately, all his armor is not living. Some of it is made of steel, insects are mechanical. Therefore, while making use of it, man has to be careful to protect himself from its tyranny. If he is weak enough to grow smaller to fit himself to his covering, then it becomes a process of gradual suicide by shrinkage of the soul. And Japan must have the firm faith in the moral law, the existence to be able to assert herself that the Western nations are following that path of suicide, where they are something their humanity under the immense weight of organization in order to keep themselves in the power and hold others in subjection. What is dangerous for Japan is not the imitation of the outer features of the West, but the acceptance of the motive force of the Western nationalism as her own. Her social idols are already showing signs of defeat at the hands of politics. I can see her motto, taken from science, survival of the fastest right, large at the entrance of her present day history. The motto whose meaning is help yourself and never heed what it costs to others. The motto of the blind man who only believes in those who can see know that men are so closely kid that when you strike other, the blow comes back to yourself. The moral law which comes back, which is the greatest discovery of man, is discovery of this wonderful truth that man becomes all the truer the more he realizes himself in other. This truth has no not only a subjective value but in manifested in every department of our life. Nations who sedulously cultivate moral blindness as the cult of patriotism will end their existence in a sudden and violent death. In past ages, we had foreign invasions, but they never touched the soul of the people deeply. They were merely the outcome of the individual ambitions, the people themselves behind, free from the responsibilities of the bazaar, and more hygienious sites of those adventures had all the
advantage of the heroic and the human disciplines derived from them. This developed their unflinching loyalty, their single minded devotion to the obligations of honor, their power of complete self surrender, and fearless acceptance of death and danger. Therefore, the idols whose seats were in the hearts of the people would not undergo any serious change owing to the policies adopted by the king or generals. But now, where the spirit of Western nationalism prevails, the whole people is being taught from boyhood to foster hatreds and ambitions by all kinds of means, by the manufacture of half truths and untruths in history, by a persistent misrepresentation of other races and culture of unfavorable sentiments towards them, by setting up memorials of events very often false, which for the sake of humanity and speedily forgotten, thus continually brewing evil meanness towards neighbors and nations other than their own. This is poisoning the very fountainhead of humanity. It is discrediting the ideals which were born of the leaves of men who were our greatest and best. It is holding up gigantic selfishness as the one universal religion for all nations of the world. We can take anything else from the hand of science, but not this elixir of moral death. Never think of a moment that hurts you, inflict upon other races will not infect you, or that enmities you sow around your homes will be a wall of protection to you for all time to come. To imbue the minds of a whole people with an abnormal vanity of its own superiority, to teach it to be pride in its moral callousness and ill begotten wealth, to perpetuate humiliation of defeated nations by exhibiting trophies won from war and using these in schools in order to breed in children's mind contempt for others, is imitating the West, where she has festering sore, whose swelling is a swelling of disease eating into its vitality. Our food crops, which are necessary for a sustenance, are products of centuries of selection and care, but the vegetation which we have not to transform into our lives does not require the patient thoughts of generations. It is not easy to get rid of weeds, but it is easy by process of neglect to ruin your food crops and let them revert to their primitive state of wildness. Likewise, the culture which has so kindly adapted itself to your soil, so intimate with the life, so human, not only needed tilling and weeding in past ages, but still anxious work and
what is merely modern as science and methods of organization can be transplanted, but what is virtually human has fibers so delicate and roots so numerous and far reaching that it dies when moved from its soil. Therefore, I am afraid of the root pressure of the political ideas of West upon your own. In political civilization, the state is an abstraction in relationship of man and utilitarian. Because it has no root in sentiments, it is so dangerously easy to handle. Half a century has been enough for you to master this mission, and there are men among you whose fondness for it exceeds their love for their living ideals, which were born with the birth of your nation and nursed in your centuries. It is like a child who, in the excitement of playing, imagines he likes his playing things better than his mother. Where man is at his greatest, he is unconscious. Your civilization, whose mainspring is the bond of human relationship, has been nourished in the depth of healthy life beyond reach of prying self-analysis. But a mere political relationship is all conscious. It is an eruptive inflammation of aggressiveness. It has forcibly burst upon your notice.
And the time has come when you have to be roused into full consciousness of the truth by which you live, so that you may not be taken unawareness. The past has been God's gift to you. About the present, you must make your own choice. So, the question you have to put in yourselves are these: have we read the world wrong and based our relation to it upon an ignorance of human nature? Is the instinct of the West right, where she builds her national welfare behind the barricade of a universal distrust of humanity? You must have detected a strong accent of fear whenever the West has discussed the possibilities of rise of an Eastern race. The reason of it is this: that the power by whose help she thrives is an evil power. So long as it is held on her own side, she can be safe. While the rest of the world trembles, the vital ambition of present civilization of Europe is to have the exclusive possession of the devil. All her armaments and diplomacy are directed upon this one object. But these costly rituals for invocation of the evil spirit led through a path of prosperity to the brink of capitalism. The furies of terror which the West has let loose upon God's world come back to threaten herself and goad her into preparation of more.
And more frightfulness, this gives her no rest and makes her forget all else but the perils that she causes to others and incurs herself. To the worship of this devil and of politics, she sacrifices other countries as victims. She feeds upon their dead flesh and grows fat upon it. So long as the caresses remain fresh, but they are sure to rot at last, and the dead will take their revenge by spreading pollution far and wide and poisoning the vitality of the feeder. Japan had all her wealth of humanity and her harmony of heroism and beauty, her depth of self control and richness of self expression, yet the Western nations felt no respect for her until she proved that the bloodhounds of Satan are not only bred in the canals of Europe but can also be domesticated in Japan and fed with man's miseries. They admit Japan's equality with themselves only when they know that Japan also possesses the key to open the floodgate of hellfire upon the fair earth whenever she chooses, and can dance in their own measure the devil dance of pillage, murder, and ravishment of innocent women. While the world goes to ruin, we know that in the early stage of man's moral immaturity, he only feels reverence for the God whose malevolence he dreads. But is this the ideal of man which we can look up to with pride? After centuries of civilization, nations fearing each other like the prowling wild beasts of the night time, shutting their doors of hospitality, combining only for the purpose of aggression or defense, hiding in their holes their trade secrets, state secrets, secrets of the armaments, making peace offerings to each other's barking dogs with the meat which does not belong to them, holding down fallen races which struggle to stand upon their feet, with their right hand dispensing religion to weaker people while robbing them with their left. Is there anything in this to make us envious? Or we bend are we to bend our knees to the spirit of this nationalism which is sowing broadcast over the world of seats, fear, greed, suspicions, and unashamed lies of diplomacy, and uncourteous lies of its profession of peace and goodwill, and universal brotherhood of a man? Can our minds be free from doubt when we rush to the Western market to buy this foreign product in exchange for our own inheritance? I am aware how difficult it is to know oneself, and man who is intoxicated fiercely denies his drunkenness, yet the West herself is anxiously thinking of her problems and trying experiments.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is A. Akshaya from grade 9, Nationalism in Japan. But she is like Gulten, who has not the heart to give up his interference in eating, and fondly clings to the hope that he can cure his nightmares of indigestion by medicine. Europe is not ready to give up her political inhumanity with all the baser passion of man attend upon it. She believes only the modification of systems and not change in our heart. We are willing to buy their machine made systems not with the heart but with the brain. We shall try them and build ships for them, but not enshrine them in our homes or temple. They are races who worship animals they kill. We can buy meat from them when we are hungry, but not worship, which goes with the killing. We must not irritate our children's mind with suppression that business is business, war is war, politics is politics. We must know that man's business had to be more than mere business and should should be her political and war. You had your own industry in Japan, how successfully honest and true it was. You can see their products by their grace and strength, their consistency in details where where they can hardly be observed. But the tidal wave of falsehood has swept over your land from that part of the world where business is business, and honestly is followed merely as the best policy. Have you never felt shame when you see the trade advertisements not only plastering the whole town with lies and execration, but invading the green field where the patients do their honest labor and the hilltops, which create the first pure light in the light of the morning? It is so easy to dwell our sense of humor and delicacy of mind with constant ab- abrasion, while falsehood talk about the proud steps in the name of trade, politics, and patriotism, that any protest against their perpetual intestine into our lives in considered to by sentimentalism unworthy of true manliness. And it has came to pass that the children of the heroes who would keep their word at the point of death, who would disdain to cheat men for vulgar profit, who even in their fight would much rather could defeat than be dishonorable, have become energetic in dealing with falsehood and do not feel humiliated by gaining advantage from them. And this has been affected by the charm of the word modern. But if undoubtedly utility be modern, beauty is for all ages. If mean selfishness be modern, the humanity ideals are not invention, and we must know for certain that. Thank you.
However, modern may be proficiency which cripples man for the sake of methods and missions, it will never live to be old. But while trying to free our minds from the arrogant claims of Europe and to help ourselves with out of quicksand of our infatuation, we may go to the other extreme and blind ourselves with a wholesale subsistence of the West. The reaction of disillusionment is just as unreal as the first shock of illusion, which must try to come to the normal state of mind by which we can clearly discern our own danger and avoid it without being unjust towards the source of that danger. There is always the natural temptation in us of wishing to pay back Europe in our own coin and return contentment and evil for evil. But that again would be the imitate Europe in one of her worst features, which come out in her behavior to people whom she describes as yellow or red, brown or black. And this is a point on which we can East have a acknowledgement or guilt and warn that our sin has been a great, if not greater, when we insulate humanity by treating with utter disdain and cruelty men who belong to a particular creed, color, or caste. This is really because we we are afraid our own weakness, which allows itself to be overcome by the sight of power, that we try to substitute it another weakness which makes itself blind to the glories of the West. We must truly know the Europe which is greater and good. We can effectively save ourselves from the Europe which is mean or grasping. It is easy to be unfair in one's judgment when on the faced with human miseries and pessimism in the result of building theories while the mind is suffering. To despair of humanity is only possible if we lose faith in truth, which brings to the strength it when its defect is greatest, and calls out new life from the depth of its disruptions. We must admit that there is a living soul in the West which is struggling unobserved against the hugeness of organization under which men, women, and children are being crushed, and whose mechanical necessities are ignoring laws that are spiritual and human. The soul whose sensibility refused to be dulled completely by the dangerous habits of heedlessness in dealings with races for whom it lacks natural sympathy. The West would never have risen to eminence which she has reached for strength were merely the strength of the brute or of the machine. The divine in her heart is suffering.
From the injuries inflicted by her hands upon the world, and from this pain of her higher nature flows the secret balm which will bring healing to those injuries. Time after time she has forgot against herself and has undone the chains which with her own hands she had fastened round helpless limbs, and through she forced poison down the throat of a great nation at the point of the sword of gain of money. She herself woke up to withdraw from it, to wash her hands clean again. This shows hidden springs of humanity in sports which look dead and barren. It proves that the deeper truth in her nation which can survive such a career or cruel crowdliness is not greed but reverence of unselfish ideals. It would be altogether unjust both to us and to Europe to say that she has fascinated the modern Eastern mind by the mere exhibition of her power. Through the smoke of canons and the dust markets, the light of her moral nature has shone bright, and she has brought to us the ideal of ethical freedom, whose foundation lies deeper than social conversations and whose province of activity in worldwide. The East has intensively felt, even through her aversion, that she has a great deal to learn from Europe, not merely about the materials or from power, but its inner source, which is of mind and of the moral nature of man. Europe has been teaching us the higher obligations of public good, good above those of the family and the clan and the scandals of the law, which makes society independent of individual caprice, secures for it continuity of progress, and guarantees justice to all men of all positions in life. Above all things, Europe has held high before our minds the banner of liberty. Through these centuries of martyrdom
and achievement, liberty of conscience, liberty of thought and action, liberty in the ideas of art and literature. And because Europe has won our deep respect, she has become so dangerous for us. Where she is stubbornly weak and false, dangerous like poison when it is served along with our best food. There is one safety for us upon which we hope we may count, and that is that we can climb Europe herself as our ally in our resistance to her temptations and to her violent encroachments. For she has ever carried her own standard of perfection, by which we can measure her faults and gauge her degrees of failure, by which we can call her before her own tribunal and put her shame, the shame which is a sign of true pride, of nobleness. Thank you.
Nationalism in Japan, but our fear is that the poison may be more powerful than the food, and what is strength in her today may not be the sign of health, but the contrary, for it may be temporarily caused by the upsetting of the balance of life. Our fear is that evil has fateful fascination when it assumes dimensions where a colossal and thought at last it is sure to lose its center of gravity by its abnormal disproportion. The mischief which it creates before its fall may be beyond reparation. Therefore, I ask you to have the strength of faith and clarity of mind to know for certain that the lumbering structure of modern progress uh, runs upon the wheels of ambition cannot hold together for long. Collisions are certain to occur, for it has to travel upon organized lines. It is too heavy to choose its own course freely. And once it is off the rails, its endless train of vehicles is escalated. A day will come when it will fail, uh, when it will fall in a heap of ruin and cause serious obstructions to the traffic of the world. Do we not see signs of this even now? Does not the voice comes to us through the din of war, the shrieks of hatred, the wailings of despair, through the churning up of the unspeakable filth which has been accumulating for ages in the bottom of this nationalism? The voice which cries to our soul that the tower of national selfishness, which does by the name of patriotism, which has raised its banner of treason against heaven, must totter and fall with a crash, weighed down by its own bulk, its flag kissing the dust, its light extinguished by my brothers when the red light of conflagration sends up its crackle of laughter to the stars. Keep your faith upon those stars and not upon the fire of destruction. For when this conflagration consumes itself and dies down, leaving its memorial in ashes, the eternal light will again shine in the east which has been the birthplace of the morning sun of man's history, and who knows if that day has not already dawned, and the sun not risen in the easternmost horizon of Asia. And I offer, as did my ancestors, riches, my salutation to the sunrise of the east, which is destined uh, once again to illumine the whole world. I know my voice is too feeble to rise itself above the uproar of this bustling time, and it is easy for any street urchin to fling against me the epithet of unpractical. It was stick to my coat tail, never to be washed away, effectively excluding me from the consideration of all respectable persons. I know what a risk one runs.
Nationalism in Japan, from the vigorous athletic routes, is being styled an idealist in these days, when thrones have lost their dignity and trumpets have become an anachronism, when the sound that drowns all the voice is the noise of the marketplace. Yet, when one day, standing on the outskirts of the Yokohama town, bristling with its display of modern miscellaneous,
I watched the sunset in your southern sea and see its peace and majesty among your pine clad hills, with a great Phrygia growing faint against the golden horizon like a god overcome with his own radiance. The music of eternity welled up through the evening silence, and I felt that the sky and the earth and the relics of the dawn and the day fall are with the poets and idealists, and not we with the market men rebelliously contemnants of all sentiment, that after the forgetfulness of his own divinity, man will remember against the heaven is always in touch with his world, which can never be abandoned for good, to be hounding wolves of the modern era, sucking humans' blood and howling to the skies.
real our real problem in India is not political, it is social. This is a condition not only prevailing in India but among all nations. I do not believe in an exclusive political interest. Politicals in the West have dominated Western ideals, and we in India are trying to imitate you. We have to remember that in Europe, where peoples had the radical unity from the beginning, and where natural resources were instituted for inhabitants, the civilization has naturally taken the characters of political and commercial aggressiveness. For on the one hand, they had to internal complication, and on the other, they had to deal with their neighbors, who were strong and rapacious, to have perfect combination among themselves, to have a perfect combination and a watchful attitude of animosity against other was taken as the solution of their problems. In former days, they organized and plundered. In the present age, the same spirit continues, and they organize and exploit whole world. But from the earliest beginnings of history, India has had her own problem constantly before her. It is the race problem. Each nation must be conscious of its mission, and we in India must realize that we cut a poor figure when we are trying to be political, simply because we have not yet been finally able to accomplish what was said before us by your providence. This problem of race unity, which we have been trying to solve for so many years, has likewise to be faced by you here in America. Many peoples in this country ask me what is happening as to caste destinations in India. But when this question is asked me, it is usually done with a superior air. And I feel tempted to put the same question to American critics with the slight modification. What have you done with the red Indian and the Negro? For you have not got over attitude of caste toward them. You have used violent methods to keep aloof from other races. But until you have solved the questions here in America, you have no right to question India. In spite of our great difficulty, however, India has done something. She has tried to make an
Nationalism in India, adjustment of races to acknowledge the real difference between them, where this exists, and yet seek for some basis of unity. This basis has come through our saints like Nanak, Kabir, Chaitanya, and other preaching. One God to all races of India in finding the solution of our problem. We shall have helped to solve the world problem as well. What India has been, the whole world is now. The whole world is becoming one country through scientific facility. And the movement is arriving when you also must find a basis of unity which is not political. If India can offer to the world her solution in it will be a contribution to humanity. There is only one history. This history of man, all national histories are merely chapters in the larger one. And we are content in India to suffer for such a great cause. Each individual has his self love, therefore, his brood instinct leads to him to fight with others in the sole pursuit of his self interest. But man has also his higher instincts of sympathy and mutual help. The people who are lacking in this higher moral power and who therefore cannot combine in fellowship with one another must pursue or live in a state of degradation. Only those people have survived and achieved civilization who have this spirit of cooperation strong in them. So we find that from the beginning of history, men had to choose between fighting with another and combining between serving their own interest or the common interest of all. In your early history, when the geographical limits of each country and also the facilities of communication were small, this problem has comparatively small in dimension. It was sufficient for men to develop their sense of unity within their area of segregation. In those days, they combined among themselves and fought against others. But it was this moral spirit of combination which was the true basis of their greatness. And this fostered their art, science, and religion at that early time, the most important fact that man had to take count of was the fact of the members of one particular race of men coming in close contact with one another. Those who truly grasped this fact through their higher nature made their mark in history. The most important fact of the present age is that all the different races of men have come close together. And again, we are confronted with two alternatives. This problem is whether the different groups of people shall go on fighting with one another or find out some true basis
of reconciliation and mutual help, whether it will be interminable competition or cooperation. I have no hesitation in saying that those who are gifted with the moral power of love and vision of spiritual unity, who have the least feeling of enmity against aliens and the sympathetic insight to place themselves in the position of others, will be the fittest to take their permanent place in the age that is lying before us. And those who are constantly developing their instinct of fight and intolerance of aliens will be eliminated. For this is the problem before us, and we have to prove our humanity by solving it through the help of our higher nature. The gigantic organizations for hurting others and warding off their blows, for making money by dragging others back, will not help us. On the contrary, by the crushing weight, the enormous cost, and their deadening effect upon living humanity, they will seriously impede our freedom in the larger life of a higher civilization. During the evolution of a nation, the moral culture of brotherhood was limited by geographical boundaries because at that time those boundaries were true. Now they have become imaginary lines of tradition divested of the qualities of real obstacles. So the time has come when man's moral nature must deal with this great fact of with all seriousness or perish. The first impulse of this change of circumstance has been the churning up of man's baser passion of greed and cruel hatred. If this persists indefinitely and armaments go on exaggerating themselves to unimaginable absurdities, and machines and storehouses envelop this fair earth with their dirt and smoke and ugliness, then it will end in a conflagration of suicide. Therefore, man will have to exert all his power of love and clarity of vision to make another great moral adjustment, which will comprehend the whole world of men and not merely the fractional groups of nationality. The call has come to every individual in the present age to prepare himself and his surroundings for this dawn of a new era, when man shall discover his soul in the spiritual unity of all human beings. If it is given at all to the West to struggle out of these tangles of the lower slopes to the spiritual summit of humanity, then I cannot but think that it is the special mission of America to fulfill this hope of God and man. You are the country of expectation, desiring something else than what is. Europe has her subtle habits of
mind and her conventions. But America, as said, has come to no conclusions. I realize how much America is untrammeled by the traditions of the past, and I can appreciate thus experimentalism is a sign of America's youth. The foundation of glory is in the future rather than in the past. And if one is gifted with the power of clairvoyance, one will be able to love the America that is to be. America is destined to justify Western civilization to the East. Europe has lost faith in humanity and has become distressful and sickly. America, on the other hand, is not pessimistic or blaze. You know, as a people, that there is such a thing as a better and best, and that knowledge drives on you. There are habits that are not merely passive but aggressively arrogant. There are not like mere walls but are like hedges of stinging nettles. Europe has been cultivating these hedges of habits for long years till they have grown round her dense and strong and high. The pride of her traditions has sent its roots deep into her heart. I do not wish to contend that it unreasonable, but pride in every form of breeds blindness at the end. Like all artificial stimulants, its first effect is a heightening of consciousness, and then with the increase in dose, it muddles it and brings an exaltation that is misleading. Europe has gradually grown hardened in her pride in all her outer and inner habits. She not only cannot forget that she is Western, but takes every opportunity to hurl this fact against others to humiliate them. This is why she is growing incapable for imparting to the East what is best in herself, and of accepting in a right spirit the wisdom that the East has stored for centuries. In America, national habits and traditions have not had time to spread their clutching, clutching roots round your hearts. You have constantly felt and complained of your disadvantages when you compared your nomadic restlessness with the settled traditions of Europe. The Europe which can show her picture of greatness to the best advantage because she can fix it against the background of the past. But in the present age of transition, when a new era of civilization is sending its trumpet call to all peoples of the world across an unlimited future, this very freedom of detachment will enable you to accept its invitation and to achieve the goal for which European began her journey but lost her midway. For she tempted out of her path by her pride of power and greed of possession.
nationalism in India, not merely your freedom from habit of the mind in individuals, but also the freedom of a history from all unpin entanglements, fit you in your career of holding the banner of civilization of the future. All the great nations of Europe have their victims in the other part of the world. Thus, not only witness their moral sympathy, but also their intellectual sympathy, which is so necessary for an understanding of races which are different from one's own. Englishmen can never truly understand India because their minds are not disinterested with regard to that country. If you compare England with Germany or France, you will find she has produced the smallest number of scholars who have studied India literature and philosophy with the amount of empathetic insight or thoroughness. This attitude of empathy and contempt is natural where the relationship is abnormal and founded upon a national selfishness and pride. But your history has been disinterested, and that is why you have been able to help Japan in her lesson in Western civilization.
And that is why China can look upon you with her best confidence in this her darkest period of danger. In fact, you are carrying all the responsibility of the great future because you are undermelted by the grasping miserliness of the past. Therefore, of all countries of the earth, America has to be fully conscious of this future. Her vision must not be obscure and her faith in humanity must be strong with the strength of youth. The parallelism exists between America and India, the parallelism of welding together into one body various races. In my country, we have been seeking to find out something common to all races, which will prove their real unity. No nation looking for a mere political or commercial basics of unity will find such a solution sufficient. Men of the thought and power will discover the spiritual unity, will realize it and preach it. India has never had a real sense of nationalism. Even though from childhood I have been taught that idolatry of the nation is almost better than reverence of God and humanity. I believe I have outgrown the teaching, and it is my conviction that my countrymen will truly gain their India by fighting against the education which teaching them that the country is greater than the ideal humanity. The education India present trying to observe the lessons from history continually too.
Nationalism in India. The lessons of our ancestors, the East in fact is attempting to take unto itself a history which is not the outcome of its own living. Japan, for example, thinks she is getting powerful through adapting Western methods, but after she has exhausted an inheritance, only the borrowed weapons of civilization will remain to her. She will not have developed herself from within. Europe has her past. Europe's strength therefore lies in her history. We in India must make up our minds that we cannot borrow others people's history, and that if we stifle our own we are committing suicide. When you borrow things that do not belong to our life, they only serve to crush your life. And therefore, I believe that it does in India no good to compete with Western civilization and its own field. But we shall be more than compensated if, in spite of the insults heaped upon us, we follow our own destiny. There are lessons which impart information or train our minds for intellectual pursuits. There are simple and can be acquired and used with advantage. But there are others which affect our deeper nature and change our direction of life. Before we accept them and pay their value by selling our own inheritance, we must pause and think deeply. In man's history, there comes ages of fireworks which dazzle us by their force and moment. They laugh not only at our modest household lamp but also at the eternal stars. But let us not for that provocation be precipitate in our desire to dismiss our lamps. Let us patiently bear our present insult and realize that these fireworks have splendor but not performance because of the extreme explosiveness which is the cause of their power and also of their exhaustion. They are spending a fatal quantity of energy and substance compared to their grind and production. Anyhow, our idols have been evolved through our own history, and even if we wished, we could only make poor fireworks of them. Because their materials are different from yours, as if also their moral purpose. If we cherish and desire of paying our all to buy a political nationality, it will be as absurd as it Switzerland has staked her existence on her ambition to build up a navy powerful enough to compete with that of England. The mistake that we make is in thinking that man's channel of greatness is only one, the one which has make itself pain.
Fully evident for the time being by its depth of insolence. We must know for certain that there is a future before us, and that future is waiting for those who are rich in moral ideas and not in mere things. And it is the privileges of man to work for fruits that are beyond his immediate reach, and to adjust his life not in slavish conformity to the examples of some present success or even to his own prudent past, limited in its aspiration, but to an infinite future, bearing in its heart the ideals of our highest expectation. We must recognize that it's providential that the West has come to India, and yet someone must show the East to the West and convince the West that the East has her contribution to make to the history of civilization. India is no bigger of the West, and yet, even though the West may think she is, I'm not for trusting of Western civilization and becoming segregated in our independence. Let us have a deep association. If Providence wants England to be the channel of the communication of that will all humanity, I have great faith in human nature, and I think the West will find its true mission. I speak bitterly of West civilization when I am conscious that it is betraying its truth and thwarting its own purpose. The West must not make herself accused to the world by using her power for her own selfish needs, but by teaching the ignorant and helping the weak. She should be saved herself from the worst danger that the strong is liable to incur by making the feeble acquire power enough to restrict her instruction. And also, she must not make her materialism to be the final thing, but must realize that she is doing a service in praising the spiritual being from the trinity of matter. I am not against one nation in particular, but against the general idea of all nations. What is the nation? It is the aspect of whole people as an organized power. This organization instantly keeps up the incidence of the population on becoming strong and efficient. But this strenuous effort after strength and eventually drains man's energy from his higher nature, where he is self sacrificing and creating. For thereby, man's power of sacrifice is diverted from his ultimate object, which is moral, to the main maintenance of his organization, which is mechanical. Yet, in this, he feels all the satisfaction of moral expectation and therefore becomes supremely.
Nationalism in India. He feels relieved of the urging of his conscience when he can transfer his responsibility to this mission, which is the creation of his intellect and not of his complete moral responsibility. By this device, the people which loves freedom perpetuates slavery in a large portion of the world with the comfortable feeling of pride of having done its duty. Men who are naturally just can be cruelly unjust both in their act and their thoughts, accompanied by a feeling that they are helping the world to receive its desert. Men who are honest can blindly go on robbing others of their human rights for self aggrandizement, all the while abusing the deprived for not deserving better treatment. We have seen in our everyday life even small organization of business and professions produce called callousness of feeling in men who are not naturally bad, and we can well imagine what a moral havoc it is causing in a world where whole peoples are furiously, furiously organizing themselves for gaining wealth and power. Nationalism is a great menace. It is the particular thing which of years has been at the bottom of India's trouble. And inasmuch as we have been ruled and denominated by a nation that is strictly political in its attitude, we have tried to develop within ourselves respect of inheritance from the past and belief in a eventual political dignity. There are different parties in India with different ideals. Some are struggling for political independence. Others think that the time has not arrived for that, and yet believe that India should have the rights to that the English colonials have. They wish to gain autonomy as far as possible. In the beginning of the history of political agitation in India, there was not conflict between parties which there is today. At the time, there was a party known as the Indian Congress. It had no real program. They had a few grievances for redress by the authorities. They wanted large representation in the council house and more freedom in municipal government. They wanted scraps of things, but they had no concentrative ideals. Therefore, I was lacking in enthusiasm for their method. It was my conviction that what in India most needed was constructive work coming from within herself. In this work, we must take all risks and go on doing the duties which by right are ours, throw in the teeth of. Thank you.
Persecution, winning moral victory at every step by our failures and suffering. We must show those who are over us that we have in ourselves the strength of moral power, the power to suffer the truth, where we have nothing to show. We have only to beg. It would be mischievous if the gifts we wish for were granted to us at once. I have told my countrymen to us at once, and I have told my countrymen and time and again to combine for the work of creating opportunities to give vent to our spirit of self sacrifice and not for the purpose of begging. The party, however, lost power because the people soon came to release how futile was the half police adopted by them. The party split and there arrived the extremists who advocated independence of actions and discarded the begging method. The East method of relieving one's mind from his responsibility towards his country. Their ideals were based on Western history. They had no sympathy with the special problems of India. They had not recognized the patent fact that there were causes in our social organization which made the Indian incapable of coping with the alien. What should we do if, for any reason, England was driven away? We should simply be victims for other nations. The same social weakness would prevail. The thing we in India have to think of is this: to remove those social customs and idols which have generated a want to a self-respect and a complete dependence on those above us. A state of affairs which has been brought about entirely by the domination in India of the caste system and the blunt and lazy habit railing upon the authority of traditions that are incongruous anachronisms in the present age. Once again, I draw your attention to the difficulties India has had to encounter and her struggle to overcome them. Her problem was the problem of the world in miniature. India is too vast in its area and too diverse in its race. It is many countries packed in one geographical capital. It is just the opposite of what Europe truly is, namely one country made into many. Thus, Europe in its culture and growth has had the advantages of the strength of the many as well as the strength of the one. India, on the contrary, being naturally many, yet advertisely one, has all along suffered from the looseness of its diversity and the feebleness of its unity. A true unity is like a round globe. It rolls on, carrying its burden easily, but diversity is a many-cornered thing which has to be dragged. Thank you.
And push it with all force. Be it said to the credit of India that this diversity was not her own creation. She has had to accept it as a fact from the beginning of her history. In America and Australia, Europe has simplified the problem by almost exterminating the original population. Even in the present age, this spirit of extermination is making itself manifest in the inhospitable shutting out of aliens by those who themselves were aliens in the lands they now occupy. But India tolerated difference of races from the first, and that spirit of toleration has acted all through her history. A caste system is the outcome of this spirit of toleration. For India has all along been trying experiments in evolving a social unity within which all the different peoples could be held together while fully enjoying the freedom of maintaining their own differences. The tie has been as loose as possible, yet as close as the circumstances permitted. This has produced something like a United States of a social federation whose common name is Hinduism. India had felt that diversity of races there must be and should be whatever may be its drawback, and you can never coerce nature into your narrow limits of convenience without paying one day very dearly for it. In this, India was right, but what she failed to realize was that in human beings differences are not like the physical barriers of mountains fixed forever. They are filled and life flow. They are changing their filled courses and their shapes and volume. Therefore, in her case regulations, India recognizes differences but not the mutability which is the law of life. In trying to avoid collisions, she set the boundaries of immovable walls, thus giving to her numerous races the negative benefit of peace and order but not the positive opportunity of expansion and movement. She expected nature where it produces diversity but ignored it where it uses the diversity for its world game of infinite permutations and combinations. She treated life in all truth where it is manifold but insulted it where it is ever moving. Therefore, life departed from her social system, and in its place she is worshipping with all ceremony the magnificent cage of countless compartments that she has manufactured. The same thing happened where she tried to ward off the collusions of trade interested. She associated different trades, the profession with a different caste. This had the effect of allaying for good the interminable jealousy and hatred
of competition, the competition which breeds cruelty and makes the atmosphere thick with lies and deception. In this also, India laid all her emphasis upon the law of heredity, ignoring the law of mutation, and thus gradually reduced the arts into crafts and genius into skill. However, what Western observers fail to discern is that in her caste system, India in all seriousness accepted her responsibility to solve the race problem in such a manner as to avoid all friction and yet to afford each race freedom within its boundaries. Let us admit India has not in this achieved a full measure of success, but this you must also concede that the West being more favorable situated as the homogeneity of races has never given her attention to this problem, and whenever confronted with it she has tried to make it easy by ignoring all it together, and this is the source of her anti-Asiatic agitation for depriving aliens of their rights to earn their honest living on this shore. In most of your colonies, you only admit them on condition of their acceptation the menial position of shivers of food and drawers of water. Either you shut your doors against the aliens or reduce them into slavery. And this is your solution of the problem of race conflict. Whatever may be its merits, you will have to admit that it does not spring from the higher impulses of civilization, but from the lower position of greed and hatred. You say this is human nature, and India also thought she knew human nature when she strongly barricaded her race distinction by the fixed barriers of social gradation. But we have found out to our cost that human nature is not what it seems, but what it is in truth, with, which is in its infinity possibilities. And when we in our blindness insult humanity for its regard appearance, it sheets its disgust to disclose to us that we have insulted our God. The degradation which we cast upon others in our pride or self interest degrades our
own humanity. And this is the punishment which is most terrible, because we do not detect until it is soon it is too late. Not only in your relation with the aliens, but with the different section of your own society, you have not achieved harmony of reconciliation. The spirit of conflict and the competition is allowed the full freedom of its reckless career. And because its genius is the greed of wealth and power, it can never come to any other and but to a violent death. In India, the production of commodities was brought under the law of social adjustments. Its basis was cooperation having
for its object the perfect satisfaction of social needs. But in the West, it is guided by the impulse of competition, whose end is the gain of wealth for individuals. But the individual is like the geometrical line, it is length without breadth. He does not got the depth to be able to hold anything permanently. Therefore, its greed or gain can never come to finality. In its lengthening process of growth, it can cross other lines and cause entanglements, but will ever go on missing the ideal of completeness in the stillness of isolation. In all our physical appetites, we recognize a limit. We know that to exceed that limit is to exceed the limit of health, but has this lust for wealth and power no bounds, beyond which it gets dominion. In these national carnivals of materialism, are not the Western people spending most of their vital energy in merely producing things and neglecting the creation of ideals? And can a civilization ignore the law of moral health and go on its endless process of inflation by gorging upon material things? Man in his social ideals naturally tries to regulate his appetites, subordinating them to the higher purpose of his nature. But in the economic world, our appetites follow no other restriction but those of supply and demand, which can be artificially fostered, affording individuals opportunities for indulgence in an endless feast of grossness. In India, social instincts impose restriction upon our appetites. Maybe it went to the extreme of repression, but in the Western, the spirit of economic organization, with no moral purpose, goads the people into the perpetual pursuit of wealth, but has this no wholesome limit. The ideals that strive to take form in social institutions have two objects. One is to regulate our passion and appetites for the harmonious development of man, and the other is to help him to cultivate disinterested love for his fellow creature. Therefore, society is the expression of those moral and spiritual aspirations of men which belong to his higher nature. Our food is creative, it builds our body, but not so wine, which stimulates. Our social ideas create the human world, but when our mind is diverted from them to greed of power, then in the state of intoxication we live in a world of abnormality, where our strength is not health and our liberty is not freedom. Therefore, political freedom does not give us freedom when our mind is not free. An automobile does not
create freedom of movement because it is a mere machine. When I myself am free, I can use the automobile for the purpose of my freedom. We must never forget in the present day that those people who have got their political freedom are not necessarily free, they are merely powerful. The passions which are unbridled in them are creating huge organizations of slavery in the discourse of freedom. Those who have made the gain of money their highest end are unconsciously selling their life and soul to rich persons or to the combinations that represent money. Those who are enamored of their political power and gloat over the extension of dominion over foreign races gradually surrender their own freedom and humanity to the organizations necessarily for holding other peoples in slavery. In the so-called free countries, the majority of the people are not free. They are driven by the minority to a goal which is not even known to them. This becomes possible only because people do not acknowledge moral and spiritual freedom as their object. They create huge eddies with their passions and they feel dizzily inebriated with the mere velocity of their whirling movement, taking that to be freedom, but the doom which is waiting to overtake them is a curtain as death for man's truth is moral truth and his emancipation is in the spiritual life. The general opinion of the majority of the present day nationalists in India is that we have come to final completeness in our social and spiritual ideals. The task of the constructive work of society having been done several thousand years before we were born, and that now we are free to employ all our activities in the political direction. We never dream of blaming our social inadequacy or as the origin of our present helplessness, for we have accepted as the creed of our nationalism that this social system has been perfected for all time to come by our ancestors who add to the Superman version of all eternity and supernatural power for making infinite provision for future ages. Therefore, for all our miseries or shortcomings, we hold responsible the historical surprises that burst upon us from outside. This is the reason why we think that our one task is to build a political miracle of freedom upon the quicksand of soil slavery. In fact, we want to dam up the true course of our own historical stream and only borrow power from the sources of the other people's history.
Those of us in India who have come under the delusion that mere political freedom will make us free have accepted the lessons from the West as the gospel truth and lost their faith in humanity. We must remember whatever weakness we cherish in our society will become the source of danger in politics. The same inertia which leads us to our idolatry of dead forms in social institutions will create in our political prison houses with immovable walls. The narrowness of sympathy which makes it possible for us to impose upon a considerable portion of humanity the galling yoke inferiority will assert itself in our politics, in creating the tyranny of injustice. When our nationalists talk about ideals, they forget that the basis of nationalism is wanting. The very people who are upholding these ideals are themselves the most conservative in their social practices. Nationalists say, for example, look at Switzerland, where in spite of race differences, the peoples have solidified into a nation. Yet remember that in Switzerland, the races can mingle. They can intermarry because they are one of the same blood. In India, there is no common birthright. And when we talk of Western nationality, we forget that the nations, they do not have that physical repulsion, one for the other. And then we have between different castes. Have we an instance in the whole world where people who are not allowed to mingle their blood shed their blood for one another, except by coercion or for mercenary purposes? And can we ever hope that these moral barriers against our race amalgamation will not stand in the way of our political unity? Then again, we must give full recognition to this fact that our social restrictions are still tyrannical, so much so as to make men cowards. If a man tells me he has heterodox ideas, but that he cannot follow them because he will be socially ostracized, I excuse him for having to live a life of untruth. In order to live at all, the social habit of mind which impels us to make the life of our fellow beings a burden to them where they differ from us even in such a thing as the choice of food, is sure to persist in our political organization and result in creating engines of coercion to crush every rational difference in which is the sign of life. And tyranny will only add to the inevitable lies and hypocrisy in our political life. Is the mere name of freedom so valuable that we should be willing to sacrifice for its sake of our moral freedom?
The intemperance of our habit does not immediately show its effect when we are in the vigor of our youth, but it gradually consumes that vigor. And when the period of decline sets in, then we have to settle accounts and pay off our debts, which leads us to insolvency. In the West, you are still able to carry your head high, though your humanity is suffering every moment from its dipsomania of ionizing power. India, also in the heyday of her youth, could carry in the vital organs the dead weight of her social organization, stiffened to rigid perfection, but it has been fatal to her and has produced a gradual paralysis of her living nature. And this is the reason why the educated community of India has become insensible of her social needs. They are taking the very immobility of our social structures as the sign of their perfection, and because the healthy feeling of pain is dead in the limbs of our social organism, they delude themselves into thinking that it needs no ministration. Therefore, they think that all their energies need their only scope in the political field. It is like a man whose legs have become shriveled and useless, trying to delude himself that these limbs have grown still because they have attained their ultimate salvation, and all
that is wrong about him is the shortness of his sticks. So much for the social and the political regeneration of India. Now we come to her industries, and I am very often asked whether there is an Indian in industry regeneration since the advent of British government. It must be remembered that all the beginning of the British rule in India, our industries were suppressed, and since then we have not met with any real help or encouragement to enable us to make a stand against the monster commercial organizations of the world. The nation have decreed that we must remain purely an agricultural people, even forgetting the use of arms for all then to come. Thus, India is being turned into so many precious morsels of food ready to be swallowed at any moment by any nation which has been the most rudimentary set of teeth in its head. India, therefore, has very little outlet for her industrial originality. I personally do not believe in the unividely organizations of the present day. The very fact that they are ugly shows that they are in discordance with the whole creation. The vast powers of nature do not reveal the truth in hiddenness, but in beauty. Beauty is the
signature with the creator stamps upon his works when he is satisfied with them. All our products that intensely ignore the laws of perfection and are unashamed in the display of unugliness bear the perpetual weight of God's displeasure. So far as your commerce lacks and dignity of grace, it's untrue. Beauty and the twin brother truth require leisure and self-control for their growth, but the greedy of gain has no time or limit to his capaciousness. Its one object is to produce and consume. It has pity neither for beautiful nature nor for living human beings. It is ruthlessly ready without a moment's hesitation to crush beauty and life of them, molding them into money. It is this ugly vulgarity of commerce which bred upon its censure of comment in our earlier days, when men had leisure to have an unclouded vision of perfection in humanity. Men in those times were rightly ashamed of their instinct of mere money making. But in the scientific age, money, by its abnormal bulk, has won its throne, and when from its invention of piled up things it insults the higher instincts of men, banishing the beauty and noble settlements from its surroundings, we submit. For we, in our meanness, have accepted bribes from its hands, and our imagination has grovelled in the dust before its invention of flesh. But its very unwellness and its endless complexities and its true signs of failure. The swimmer who is an expert and does not exhibit his muscular force by violent movements, but exhibits some power which is invisible and which it shows itself in perfect grace and responsiveness. The true destination of man from animals is in its powers and worth which are inner and invisible. But the present day commercial civilization of man is not only taking too much time and space, but killing the time and space. Its movements are violent, its noise is discordantly loud. It is carrying out its own dimension because it is trampling into distortion the humanity upon which it stands. It is strenuously churning out money at cost of happiness. Man is reducing himself to his minimum in order to be able to make amplest room for his organizations. He is deriding his human settlements into shame because they are apt to stand in the way of his machines. In our mythology, we have the legend that the man who performs penances for attaining immortality has to meet with temptation sent by Indra, the lord of immortals, if he is lured by them, he is lost. The West has been striving for centuries after its goal of immortality. Indra has sent her the temptation to try her. It is the gorgeous temptation of wealth. She has accepted it, and her civilization of humanity has lost its path in the wilderness of missionary. This commercialism with its barbarity of ugly decorations is a terrible menace to all humanity because it is setting up the ideal of power over that of perfection. It is making the cult of self-seeking exult in its naked shamelessness. Our nerves are more delicate than our muscles. Things that are the most precious in us are helpless as babes when we take away from them the careful protection which they claim from us for their very preciousness. Therefore, when the careless rudeness of power runs amok in the broad way of humanity, it scares away by its grossnesses the ideals which we have cherished with the martyrdom of centuries. The temptation which is fatal for the strong is still so more for the weak, and I do not welcome it in our Indian life, even though it will be sent by the Lord of Immortals. Let our life be simple in its outer aspect and rich in its inner gain. Let our civilization take its firm stand upon its basis of social cooperation and not upon that of economic exploitation and conflict.
How to do it in the teeth of the drainage of our lifeblood by the economic dragons is the task set before the thinkers of all Oriental nations who have faith in the human soul. It is a sign of laziness and impotency to accept conditions imposed upon us by others who have other ideals than us. We should actively try to adapt the world powers to guide our history to its own perfect end. From the above, you will know that I am not an economist. I am willing to acknowledge that there is a law of demand and supply and an infatuation for man for more things than are good for him. And yet, I will persist in believing that there is such a thing as the harmony of completeness in humanity, where poverty does not take away his riches, where defeat may lead him to victory, death to impolity, and where in the compensation of internal justice, those who are the last may yet have their insult transmuted into a golden triumph.
The last sun of the century set amidst the blood-red clouds of the west and the whirlwind of hatred. The naked passion of self-love of nation in its drunken delirium of greed is dancing to the clash of steel and the howling words of vengeance. The hungry self of the nation shall burst in a violence of fury from its own shameless feeding, for it has made the world its food, and licking it, crunching it, and swallowing it in big morsels. It swells and swells, till in the midst of its unholy feast descends the sudden shaft of heaven piercing its heart of grossness. The crimson glow of light on the horizon is not the light of the dawn of peace, my motherland. It is the glimmer of the funeral pyre burning to ashes, the vast flesh, the self-love of the nation dead under its own axis. The morning waits behind the patient dark of the east, meek and silent. Keep watch, India. Bring your offering of worship for the scared sunrise. Let the first hymn of its welcome sound in your voice and sing. Come, peace, the daughter of God's own great suffering. Come with the treasure of contentment, the sword of fortitude, and meekness crowning the forehead. Be not ashamed, my brothers, to stand before the proud and the powerful with your white robe of simpliness. Let your crown be of humility, your freedom, the freedom of the soul. Build God's throne daily upon the apple bareness of your poverty. And know what is huge is not great, and pride is not everlasting.
Rabindranath Tagore was a Bengali poet, musician, and artist of India who was highly influential in introducing the Indian culture to the West. He was the first non-European to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature. His book Nationalism was written in 1917, which has become a contemporary in later years. The book was a compilation of 3 lectures of Tagore: Nationalism in the West, Nationalism in Japan, and Nationalism in India. The conclusion is drawn with a poem, The Sunset of the Century, which was written on the last day of the century. In all these lectures or volumes, Tagore rejected the term nationalism as understood in the Western text. The matter of the fact is Tagore used nationalism in its broadest sense, as he was the champion of internationalism and universal brotherhood. So it's quite natural that he was not in favor of the kind of jingoistic nationalism we commonly observe. For that reason, he had difference of opinion on the issues of nationalism with many great thinkers in India and abroad at that time. Thank you.